suckle in it. I'm a reenactor. And I used reenacting or living history to cook my kids into my world history classes and other subjects that I taught. And I would dress the part, and I would play the music of the time period in the background, and I would show them the art of the culture and time period we were dealing with. And I brought in stuff for them to touch. Fancy teacher talk, it's realia or manipulatives. It's artifacts, it's stuff that kids can handle, which makes it a kid-friendly museum. Well, after 36 years, I got time on my hands. I have a room full of garb at the house. I have a bunch of things lying around the house that I used as artifacts, and I have a passion for bringing the past to life, which is why I do historical reenactment anyway, and I have a desire to preserve landmarks. So what I am doing today is I'm racing the rain as I head back to Mission Santa Bárbara, because I'm on this very pretentious sounding mission Odyssey, where I'm going to each of the places associated with the missions, and I'm doing this in garb. I want to record everything. And I realized I had too much stuff. So that means another film, another journey. Oops. Which is fine, because I'm getting to drive along the coast right now, up the Camino Real, and we'll get filming done before the rain shows up. I hope you'll stick with me on my journey. Now we're going to get into Island of the Blue Dolphin territory, which just kind of struck me by surprise that, I ended up connecting, because I read Island of the Blue Dolphins when I was probably in the 4th grade or something like that, and, I just remembered the book, and then I suddenly realized, wait a minute, these are connected, all this is connected with the missions. The story of the Lone Woman of San Nicolas takes place on San Nicolas. Alright, and this is going to become the basis of the children's novel Island of the Blue Dolphins. Well, the people on the islands, we already talked about how their dialects are forming or subdialects are forming because they're living in relative isolation. Except for, traveling back and forth by the redwood plank canoes, the tomo. And what's going to make the people on San Nicolas different from the islands that are further north is these people are related to the Tongva, not the Chumash. So they're speaking a different language. And not only that, because of their isolation, their version of Tongva is going to become very different from that spoken on the mainland. So there's already that split. There's already that isolation there. These Alaskan workers out of Fort Ross sailing their skin boats, the Ikyan or the Baidarkas, were called Aleuts. And in 1814, some Aleutian seal hunters ended up coming to the island of San Nicolas, and they apparently negotiated a deal where they could hunt seals. They were working for the Russian-American company. They could hunt seals, and they would end up paying the Nicoleños, as the Spanish would call it. And, according to one version, The Aleutians say one of their people was murdered by one of the Nicoleños, and so retribution was sought. The other version is, no, the Aleutians ended up killing most of the men and raping most of the women. So that's around 1814. From San Nicolas, we're going to turn our attention to the northern Channel Islands. Relations between the Chumash and the Spanish are falling apart, and that's largely because in 1810 Mexico is trying to break away from Spain, and what's happening is the Spanish are sending fewer and fewer supplies to Alta California, and that means the presidios are telling the missions to tell the native Californians, work harder. We need to keep the presidio supplied. And the conditions are getting worse. In 1821, Mexico achieved independence from Spain. And things are going to be changing dramatically as far as how Alta California is dealt with. For one, the comandantes in the presidios are telling the padres at the missions, tell the Indians, work harder. We need more food. We need supplies. We got to get back up to speed. And so the padres are telling the natives, and that's also passing on to the asistencias, to have the native Californians work harder. But that's not going to be the only issue. The Spanish and now the Mexicans are pretty much trampling the cultures of the various Native Americans. The next year, the soldados start clearing the Chumash off of the Channel Islands, and they're incorporating them into the missions over at Mission San Buenaventura and at Mission Santa Bárbara. So that's not sitting well with the Chumash. When the Canaleños get dragged off of their islands and they get shipped to either Mission San Buenaventura or Mission Santa Bárbara, their culture is going to die, because these are going to be folks that are going to be in the minority and they're going to be absorbed by the majority, which means their dialect is going to go away. What will end up happening next is, because the Chumash are pretty much getting their culture trampled, they're planning a revolt. And this revolt would be particularly effective if they carried it off right. It would be really effective. It was scaring the Padres big time because of the way the mountains sloped towards the sea. If the Chumash gained control of the area, that would split Alta California, and the only communication between the northern and southern parts would have been by sea. So this revolt had to be crushed. The way the revolt was triggered, it had been planned for months, but it got triggered a little early because a boy from La Purísima traveled over to Mission Santa Ynez to visit a relative who was locked up, who was being punished. And one of the soldados severely beat the boy from La Purísima, and then Chumash country exploded. And Mission Santa Ynez was burned to the ground, or almost all to the ground. And the Chumash took over La Purísima, and they managed to hang on to that for quite a while. And the revolt finally did spread down to Mission Santa Bárbara. And it was described in one instance as being almost bloodless. But then you start reading about, well, there were some soldiers that were wounded. But in the meantime, you have one of the padres volunteering to stay because what he wants to do is he wants to play peacemaker. And he is ultimately going to negotiate the end of the Chumash Revolt by convincing the Spanish to offer, or actually the Mexicans, to offer amnesty to the Chumash. One other way that the Mexicans were trying to change things in Alta California and to establish further control is he decided at one point to ship about 80 convicts up north to the Santa Barbara area, which I suppose probably would have made the jail that was at Mission Santa Barbara useful. Although that was a really small jail, so I don't know where all those guys were going to fit. And then it was decided that there were about 30 incorrigibles, that's how they were described, and they were dumped on the island of San Miguel. So San Miguel became a penal colony. Of course, the guys escaped, so I'm going to assume they built boats. In 1835, word has traveled that there's some people on the island of San Nicolas. And apparently there's not very many of them. And at this point, you had secularization take place. So an idea of a rescue mission was mounted, but it was ended up being paid for by the mission of Santa Bárbara. The mission of San Gabriel, which would have been a more likely place to take any of the Nicoleños because of the Tongva connection, there is no mission San Gabriel anymore. It's been secularized. And so it's decided to rescue the people and rescue might not be the right word, and move them to the mission of Santa Bárbara. In 1835, the crew of the ship Peor es Nada ended up removing the remaining survivors on San Nicolas. So the Nicoleños, or maybe 20 of them, ended up being taken to Mission Santa Bárbara. So the woman who didn't make the evacuation, or the girl who didn't make the evacuation, she lived for 18 years in isolation on San Nicolas. So there's nobody to talk to. All right? She's totally alone. There was a version of the story that said that she was going to board the ship, but realized her brother wasn't on the ship and ran back for him, and the ship took off. But that, when you have to consider, this is the Victorian era, that facet of the story didn't get added until about the 1880s, and maybe that was romanticizing it. So she's living in isolation, and sailors would talk about passing near the island and they would see a woman on the cliffs, and there was this ghostly image. And finally in 1853 she was removed from the island. Padre Jose Gonzalez Rubio of the Santa Barbara Mission offered people money to find this lone woman. In 1853, there was a Santa Barbara fur trapper named George Nediver who ended up making 3 attempts to find the lone woman of San Nicolas. His first 2 attempts failed, obviously, because he made a 3rd attempt. And he took her back to the mission at Santa Barbara, which, even though the mission was supposed to be secularized, it still pretty much was operating. And no one spoke this woman's language. And she was like a drop in the bucket. Someone who was a cruzeño had said that he sort of understood what she was saying, or when she would sing a song, he translated it. But considering she spoke a version of the Tongvan language, and the cruzeños were speaking a variant of Chumash, it's pretty unlikely that he understood the words. Just 7 weeks after arriving on the mainland, the woman baptized as Juana Maria died of dysentery. She was buried in an unmarked grave on the Nicolas family plot at the Santa Barbara Mission Cemetery. Here's one of those horrible ironies of history. In 1814, after the massacre of the Nicoleño by the Aleutians working for the Russian-American Company, some of them were captured by authorities of Spanish California, who considered their activity poaching. They didn't seem to be terribly worried about the Nicoleño. One Aleut, Chumash, who was baptized as Peter in the Eastern Orthodox Church, was killed for refusing to renounce his Orthodox faith and accept Catholicism. For this, he was canonized as St. Peter the Aleut in 1980 by the Eastern Orthodox Church. Again, I have too much stuff, which either means I talk too much, or I keep finding things that need to be documented. That's the goal of this, is to document the past. So I hope you'll stick with me.